Hey, everyone. Our next guest today is Jeff Garson. He's got a fantastic story to share that I think really will resonate with you. It resonates with me. And I won't introduce him for himself. I'll let him do that. But today on What's the Deal, we're listening to someone who has made a dramatic investment of time to write a book, which I think is really one of the scariest things that any of us can do as an entrepreneur. And I'm sure it wasn't just about the money of being an author, but how, Jeff, did you bring it upon yourself to make this choice and write a book, and what motivates you, and what's the book? Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Happy to be here. So the book is called Radical Decency, and it's about a way of living, an approach to living, which is based on values. And so you want to know how I came to this. Do you want a bit of my story as background?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I spent 25 years as a lawyer, and it was okay. I liked the work. I was good at it. And it was an okay life, but not a great life. And I began to realize that a lot was missing. And at that point, I also needed to do some work on my marriage. So I got into therapy, and I began to realize that I'd always been active in the community, and the things that I was trying to accomplish in the community to create a better world really got back to a set of values, which I call decency, and I break down to respect, understanding, empathy, acceptance, appreciation, fairness, and justice. And as I began to do my personal work and think about my own life, I thought, well, the same things that I want to put out in the world, I want to live, and that's a better way of living. And so I made a switch from being a lawyer to being a psychotherapist, so I could teach those values and also think about how to apply them in my life, and discovered that it's a much better way to live. I've been doing it for 20 years, and that led to a book about radical decency.
Well, there's a whole lot there. So let's start. One thing you said, you were a lawyer.
Right.
And what kind of law did you practice?
I was a business bankruptcy lawyer.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, usually when people are at that stage, sometimes there's bitter fights over money, but a lot of times people are ready to take what they can get. Were people at each other's throats in that field? Were people constantly, screaming bloody murder and give me all you got? Or what was the vibe? What was the work?
You put your finger on it. Bankruptcy is every man for himself. Get in there fast, get as much as you can, and get out. And that's what I did professionally for 15 years.
Once upon a time was in an airport, and somebody had left a book lying around, and in these pre-COVID days, I picked it up and I read it. Mm-hmm. And it was Alan Greenspan's book, and I wouldn't have read it otherwise, but had I not found it in an airport, because it's kind of boring. But one thing he says in his book is that if everybody sued each other over every single problem, then the courts would collapse. That the point that a well-run nation can't litigate all its problems. There has to be, problem solving outside of litigation. And in my business, I sell real estate, as people know. Sometimes when things don't go the right way, people think they're going to sue this person or sue that person. And the suing is so complicated and difficult that it's not really an option, though people don't realize it. But what they default to then is yelling. Because
right.
And so I can imagine your world, of course, they're already in court, but their legal options are almost exhausted, that they're really sort of putting the pedal to the metal and there's no gas in the car. And that's sort of the adrenaline deficiency, the sort of constant imbalance that you were operating as an environment with other people, and you become the counselor.
Exactly right. And that's all law. That's not just bankruptcy law. And really what happens in bankruptcy is the people with the power, the secured lenders, the banks, wind up in the driver's seat because, that's the way the law is set up. Basically, everything goes to the, senior secured lender, and everybody else is fighting for scraps.
So this was not yesterday. How long ago was it now since you said, I would rather help people recoup their sanity as opposed to recoup their, assets?
Well, the transition happened between about 1995 and about 2000.
Okay.
And there's a story behind it. I don't know if you want me to get into
Please,
it.
we're on a Zoom call and we're
Okay.
recording it. We can
Okay.
edit it if we don't like it.
Great. Well, the thing, in a way, what propelled me out of the law, in addition to my feeling right from the start that it was not a pleasant environment, and I didn't want to spend my life pushing and shoving and trying to be the toughest guy in the room, was that I wound up working on a very large Ponzi scheme that was run.
Did it work out well for you?
Well, it worked out very well for the people in the case because, no, I didn't run it. I tried to fix it as a lawyer. But what happened was I was working with, I'm Jewish, but I was working with some people who happened to have some very good values, and they were some of the leading evangelical organizations in the country. And they set their mind to saying, we're going to unwrap this Ponzi scheme in a fair way. And it was called New Era, and that's what we did. We had $500 million in people who were owed money, and we did something that was very fair. And having done that, the prospect of then going back, I spent almost full time in that case for 3 years. The idea of going back to representing banks and grabbing as much money as I could from struggling businesses just had no appeal anymore. So I switched. I decided law had run its course, and I retooled as a psychotherapist.
Wow. And so what was it like getting on your feet as a psychotherapist? And just for the interest of time, how did you then go from becoming a psychotherapist to developing a strategy, a framework, so that you could actually create a book out of it?
Well, in a way, the two things happened simultaneously. So when I left the law, I had time on my hands, and I started thinking in earnest about what do we have to do to make this world a better place? And what I came to was the notion that so many of the bad things that happen in the world are motivated by values that are, by the way, not bad, just way overstated. And I call those compete and win, dominate, and control.
Can you repeat that?
Compete and win, dominate, and control.
Compete and win, dominate and control.
And
sounds like the prayer that I've taught my son every night. No, just kidding.
Well, there's nothing wrong with those values in their place, but they show up every place. And they become the point of the exercise in everything from business, where it's somewhat understandable, to our marriages, to just about everything else in life. And that's not good. So I thought, well, if so many of the indecencies in the world are caused by a bad set of values, then the way that we need to tackle creating a better world is to practice an alternative set of values. Furthermore, since we're very influenced by our environments and we're creatures of habit, we have to practice that alternative set of values radically at all times in every context without exception. So that was the beginnings of radical decency. And then sorry.
You know, we had mentioned just before we came on the air that I'm a big fan, as are you, of a woman who's written a book with a similar title called Radical Acceptance.
Right.
Named Tara Brach, who I, am a big fan of.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the difference between, you said that Radical Acceptance is a book that you're familiar with and that Tara Brach is one of your teachers.
Quite right.
Can you speak about that for a second?
Well, so what I articulate, I think, is pretty simple. Practice these values and do it at all times and in every context. Its application is really complicated. And Tara Brach, who, as you said, is my teacher, and I'm a great admirer of her and her work. She teaches basically mindfulness, and mindfulness has so much to teach us about applying the values that I talk about, decency, because when you think about applying it, you suddenly realize, you very quickly realize, almost every moment, if I'm going to be decent to myself, others, in the world, there are a lot of dilemmas, often dilemmas that you can't, solve easily. Because if I do something that works for me better, it's going to work for somebody else less. It'll have implications, more generally in the world. And, I think what Tara teaches is to sit with things and to let them settle in and let your wisdom emerge in each moment. And I think in many ways, I think that's the essence of mindfulness, which I practice and which I think is terrific. And I think radical decency builds on that mindset and says, when you can bring that mindset out of your meditation practice and into the world, and then start balancing and integrating what's the right thing to do by you and others, you're well on your way, I think, to leading a more values-based life, which, by the way, I think is a terrific way to live.
Well, we only have a few more minutes left, but I just have to ask, how have you seen this affect your personal relationships, your marriage, and your business since you adopted this diametric new direction, new profession, and new value set?
I'd say that there are two major outcomes for me. One is that I feel like I have a much better sense of direction when I'm negotiating day-to-day things with my wife, or, as you point out, in business.
I'm a bad negotiator with my wife. There's not much of a negotiation.
Well, if you think about it, if your lodestar is to be decent to her and decent to you, and not compromise on either, and if she has that same approach, I think you're set up for success. There'll be a lot of. I just
did a transaction with the most wonderful couple, or we're in the midst of it. I was negotiating it today, and they had the most wonderful things to say about each other, and in their conversation, and in that conversation, I recognized to some degree my relationship, and that is, the most wonderful thing that we can have in our personal relationships, which I didn't have for so long, and I'm grateful for.
Well, when it comes to couples work, if you have trust, if you have shared values, and of course the attraction, then I think that equation of, I call it the holy trinity: be decent to yourself, make that a priority, be decent to your wife, make that an equal priority, and then tend to the relationship.
Well, and it's so true in personal relationships, and it's equally true in business ethics. The two are not different,
Well, sure. And if you don't mind my saying, that's exactly where I'm going in my community activist life, is that the foundation I started 3 years ago with a partner is bringing radical decency to business, because business runs everything else, it funds everything else. And if we could change business, I mean to tell you, the world would change with it. And being radically decent in business can work. It's good business, loyal customers, happy employees. The thing you have to remember is 80% of the time, 90% of the time, being decent and being a successful businessman is going to work. But there's a 10 to 20% zone where you have to choose values and trust that in the long term it's going to work out. And I think that's where the rubber hits the road in business. Okay, there are a lot of businessmen now who are saying, we want to do good in the world, but you got to look at that 10 to 20% zone. Are you making the tough choices when it doesn't seem obvious that profitability and decency are going to be compatible?
You're so right. And There's so much more to say about that, but I think when you are rooted, that's the foundation, right? And then from there,
Yeah.
things might go one way or another, but what you can count on is that there will always be challenges. What do you plan on coming back to?
Exactly right. And what I say to businessmen, sometimes in my practice, but often in the work of the foundation, which is working with businesses, is look, you're a person first and a businessman second. And if you can embrace that, and you should, because you only have one life to live, and you're going to live it in this world, and so are your children, then you're beginning to move in the direction which I think you ought to move in, which is make money. Of course, it's very serious. You have to do it as a businessman, but do it in a radically decent way.
Well, let's leave it at there for now. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. And where can we find your book online?
You can find it on Amazon, easy as pie. If you want to be in touch with me, just go to jeffgarson.com. Happy to answer any questions. And you can buy the book there as well.
I'm going to check it out, Jeff. Thank you for
so
being
much
here. And where are you living?
I'm a Philadelphian forever, for 50 years. I was born in New York, moved to Philadelphia as a young man, but I'm currently splitting my time between Maine, where I am now, and Philadelphia.
Well, it looks like a wonderful room you're in. And if you're ever around New York City, you'll have to stop by and say hi.
It'd be my pleasure.
It'd be the decent thing to do.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Talk to you soon.
Yep. Bye-bye. So long.